Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon. Or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode.
Tonight's episode is all about optimism. And that's a good thing, because this time of year, people like me are feeling a little bit down. So remember to tip your paperboy, your barkeep, your waitress, and your favorite podcast by going to www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com and clicking on the coffee cup icon. Tonight's guest is Maxim Jago. Maxim is an award-winning filmmaker, best-selling author, consultant futurist, director of the Creativity Conference, and an international public speaker. Maxim presents an engaging, optimist, realist perspective on personal development and collective endeavor. And you're about to meet him after this opening bit.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
I am here with world traveler Maxim Jago, but he's oh so much more than that. Maxim, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you are a man who's always on the move. You're kind of like a complex wine. You're one person going one way, and then you're doing something else somewhere else. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself to our listeners. How would you describe yourself when someone asks you, Maxim, what do you do for a living?
Oh my goodness. It's am I allowed to say it's complicated?
Yes.
So essentially, I'm a keynote speaker, I'm a futurist, an author, and a filmmaker, and I founded the Creativity Conference, which I guess we'll get to. It's a conference running next year in Iceland, in Reykjavik. And I share my time between consulting on emerging technologies, education, probably best known as an author for the official book on Adobe Premiere Pro, the Classroom book, and also the official book on Adobe Audition, official training videos on Avid, Media Composer, a couple of thousand tutorials on post-production. And actually, I just completed the second draft of my first philosophy book called How to Be. So I share my time between exploring creative work, creative projects with people, and technology projects, and making films myself.
Do you sleep much at night? Are you like a 6-hour-a-night sleep guy, or what do you like?
I really, really like 8 hours, and I almost never get it. I can get by on 4 hours a night for a few days, but yeah, 6 or 7 is usually what I.
So, look, there's so much to cover. You're also a filmmaker, and there's, we'll get to your book in a second, but let's talk about the creative community first. You want to tell us what that's all about?
Yeah. Right. So, well, there's 2 parts to it. So the the most important part is the conference. So, I've been speaking at conferences for about 20 years. Sometimes it's a keynote for a company, or sometimes it's a presentation to a general audience on a theme. And I noticed that at these conferences, I would give my presentations, and then apart from heckling my friends, I wouldn't really attend any other sessions, right? And I was thinking one day, well, why is that? Well, what am I really doing at these conferences? Because I would generally try to stay for the whole conference. And I realized that what was happening was that I would just attend in order to bump into people randomly and have these incredible conversations and learn about their work and what they're doing and connect with people. And I was thinking one day, well, what kind of conference would I pay to go to rather than being paid? And that was the genesis for the Creativity Conference. And it's a rather special event because ordinarily when I'm speaking, and many of the speakers that we have for the conference, when they're speaking, we have an agenda that's set for us by whoever's hiring us, whoever's running the conference. But at the Creativity Conference, we don't speak about workflows, technology, techniques, business skills, branding, legal issues. That is kind of agenda-based. Like, we just don't do it. We don't talk about social issues in particular. We just invite speakers to speak about what they wish they were free to speak about most of the time, which is, I think, what inspires them so profoundly that they have no choice. They're just compelled to produce something truly original, something that never existed before. And we invite them to talk about how they do that. So how are they inspired? What does that feel like? How do they know when it's real? Okay, and once you've got that inspiration, what do you do about it? And I describe it as a bit like a campfire where you're sitting with a friend and you say to your friend, hey, you do that thing, that special thing that you do. Can you tell me a bit more about that? Right? What is that? How does that work? Your friend gets a stick and another marshmallow and they put it on the fire and they say, let me tell you the real deep down truth, the real way this works. I'm going to tell you the inner everything. And that's the Creativity Conference. It's incredibly diverse. We've got super diverse speakers, super diverse forms of creativity. We have a movie night at the Ice Museum. We've got the whole place to ourselves. It's the best domed cinema in Europe, apparently. We've got a music night in this fantastic venue with a proscenium stage. We've got a closing night party. It's like an open mic thing. 7 concurrent rooms, plus a digital experience room, plus a major foyer area where we'll be beginning each day with mindfulness and Tai Chi. It's going to be pretty spectacular. And it's in Iceland. It's in Reykjavik. And we ran this conference online a couple of times this year, and it was phenomenal. And at the end of it, we had loads of people saying, finally, I found my family. It's kind of a bit like Burning Man in the sense that it's all about the giving economy. Everyone's just trying to give. We don't pay the speakers. They come for free. We cover their travel, and everybody wants to come. We've got these amazing people. But people were saying, how do I stay connected? So I used, there's a platform called Mighty Networks that provides services a little bit like Facebook groups, but they're not on Facebook. So you've got none of the issues that people have with being on Facebook. And I triple checked and had a call with the people at Mighty Networks to make sure there's no creepy tracking, there's no ads, there's no claims on intellectual property. It is a free space and it's a free community to join. And you can just share projects and updates and information, things you're working on and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. You were talking about that. And I was thinking it's Burning Man, like you mentioned, meets TED Talk.
Yeah, I kind of. That's pretty much spot on. Yeah, Burning Man meets TED. I'm going to use that.
Oh, cool, good, all right, excellent. Yeah. How do introverts do with this? Are they very comfortable? And I ask this for a reason. I work at a company, a big financial services company, and they haven't had this meeting for a couple of years, but they used to have this annual meeting. Our calendar year would end at the end of June, and in July we'd go to the hottest place on earth and we'd get together, and there'd be 500. And they have a great agenda, but it was really great if you're in sales, which a lot of it is driven, and you're very outgoing. But for people introverted like me, it's like I get exhausted after a couple hours and I want to hide in my room, So how do and some conferences are like that. It's like go, go, go. It's great. The energy is there, but a good portion of the world isn't wired that way. So 100%. Do you get I would imagine a lot of the creative types are the introverted that kind of find a social voice at your event, right?
Just such an interesting question, and I think, we could do a deep dive on introversion, and there's a couple of ways in which people are introverted, right? One way is that there's a kind of almost agoraphobia. They're afraid of social contact for all sorts of complex reasons. Could be neurological, could be social, could be nature or nurture. But they're uncomfortable, actively uncomfortable with human contact. That's one kind of introversion. But I think there's another kind, and I think the other kind fits the bill more for creatives. It's not that you have a problem with social contact. Like you said, you could do a couple of hours and you're fine.
Yeah.
It's that you're so aware and present and sensitive and conscientious that social time is a drain. It's work. You're putting a lot of effort into being aware of your environment. You're listening intently when people speak. You're paying attention, and your brain is having to work. Your brain can use up to something like 60% of the energy in your body. It's an enormous amount of fuel that it uses. And so with all of that attentiveness and awareness and presence, it becomes exhausting. And I know a lot of people, not just people that would describe themselves as creatives, but a lot of people who say just what you said. There comes a point where I just need to sit quietly alone for a while. The Creativity Conference is actually, if you were to stand in the foyer, we can take up to 450 delegates and attendees, and then we reach the limit for our venue. But the foyer area, the hub, will be relatively peaceful and quiet. And then we've got all these rooms. You go to a room to participate in a session, to have an experience, to engage. But we're also building 2 or maybe 3 dedicated interior garden spaces for people to meet. So we have a Japanese designer working on a Japanese garden. We're going to have an Icelandic garden. And if we get the numbers, we'll have a third one, which will be a world garden. And these spaces are there for people to connect, engage, and meet. And they'll be a little bit more peaceful. We're actually looking at seeing if we can install a Japanese foot spa.
Oh.
So people can sit in the foot spa and relax and chat. But I also think that these kinds of in-person conferences are not for everybody. We'll be filming and live streaming everything, and we're making the live streams completely free. We're charging a little bit of money for there's a version of remote access via probably Zoom we'll use, where you can participate in the Q&As and get the replays for a while.
Yeah.
And then a little bit more money again to have all of the library of everything and the libraries from the last 2 conferences. It's well over 100 hours of content already. I think we'll be hitting about 200 hours. But I think that for many people, small group conversations, it's not a fear thing, right? It's not a psychological disorder. It's just there's less information, less sensory input. So it's less of a strain. I think artists, we train ourselves to be paying more attention, but paying more attention is an effort and it can be exhausting.
I have to ask you something. You mentioned the gardens. Was that inspired? You were doing a project. I don't know if it was finished yet. Jolie's garden. Was that inspired by that?
Oh, bless you. Thank you for asking about that. Yeah, it's interesting. So I actually directed my first feature a couple of years back, and we were working through post, and then we had the lockdown, and then I actually just took delivery of the new DJI released a new drone, the Mavic 3, with a Cine package. It's a fantastic piece of technology. And we're going to reshoot the end of the film I directed a couple of years back with this drone. And that was my first foray, feature-length fiction directorial debut. Jolly's Garden is now just exploding. We're speaking to sources of finance, and the whole project is kind of at the end of development, and we're poised now to raise the finance and go into pre-production. And what's special about Jolly's Garden, and goodness, I've been speaking about it that long, but what's special about Jolly's Garden is that, it's just this gorgeous, very beautiful, a super intense psychological thriller. It's set in an underground garden. And it's about a girl who's lived in the garden her entire life, and she doesn't know that she's a prisoner in the garden. She was literally a baby when she went into it. And no one's ever told her that she's a prisoner. And no one's ever told her that the garden is artificial. The grass is made of plastic, the flowers are made of cloth, the sun's an infrared heater with a pull cord switch. And there's the sound of birdsong coming from around the ceiling. It's a very large underground space. But the most important thing is that she's never been told is that she's blind.
Yeah, okay. I thought I remember that.
So
Yep.
Whenever she has visitors, they all pretend to be blind. Her parents visit. She has a live-in nurse who looks after her. And the story is about why she's there and what happens to her. But importantly, ultimately, the story is about whether she lives or dies. It's a psychological thriller that builds and builds in intensity just from the dialogue. But what's special about the project is that we're shooting this as a 2D film, and it's just going to look gorgeous. We describe it as a beautiful place where bad things happen. And
is this something you should see in the theater?
oh yeah,
or is
yeah,
it okay
absolutely,
to see? I mean,
absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's going to be a gorgeous, traditional, theatrically released feature film. But then, in addition to that version of the film, we're producing what I would call I'm coining this phrase. I think I'm calling it a VR film. And by that, I don't mean 360 video that a lot of people use as, surround video.
Yeah.
I mean a true photorealistic, three-dimensional capturing, rendering of the story, where you will be able to physically walk around the garden in a one-to-one scale. It'll be photorealistic, it'll be gorgeous, and the capturing and performances of the actors will be photorealistic too. So you can decide who you stand next to during dialogue. Or you can just ignore the dialogue and go and walk away and explore the garden. So it's a non-interactive experience. So I'm not calling it a VR experience. You can pause and rewind and that kind of thing, but it really is there for you to witness like immersive theater. And you will be in the space with the cast.
It's almost like a game. It's almost like a game within a film, the experience, the immersive experience.
Right. And it's kind of like, if anyone's ever listening to this and they've played games like Grand Theft Auto and the Oblivion games, there's moments where you walk up to some characters in the game and you witness them having an argument or something, or they have a funny conversation, and you can choose to watch that play out. The difference is that this will be you'll be in there. We're looking at doing installation-based experiences where we have mixed reality. So if there's a bench in the garden, you will be able to physically go over and sit on the bench that you're experiencing in virtual reality.
Wow.
And there's placement in three-dimensional space. So if you want to, while the dialogue is happening, you could walk in a circle around the characters if you want. You have embodiment in a sense. You feel like you're present. It's a very different way to experience a narrative. Very compelling. And if you look at what's happening with VR and XR now, people are doing things like curing PTSD and curing vertigo by remaking the experiences that people have. And there's some great applications for VR to be very helpful for people, because you're truly having an experience. You're not watching it through the window of a screen. And so that's where we're headed with Jolly's Garden. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, your theatrical release, where you release that, because I would imagine you'll be picky about the venues that you unveil it, right? It can't be just any mom and pop theater, right? You would have to be a pretty good place where you show it at, almost like I don't know. What are those immersive theaters where all around you can pick up, all of your senses are going nuts? I forget what they call those.
Oh, like the 4D things. Well, actually, because this is the thing, right? We're kind of producing two completely different projects. So the traditional 2D version, that'll just go out into theaters, and we'll be glad of anyone that will screen it.
Yeah.
We're looking at a proper budget, but it's still an indie film. It's not a studio picture.
Yeah.
Unless there's any studio bosses out there that want to pick up the project. You never know.
Well,
you never know.
You never know who's listening.
It's a pretty compelling project. But then the VR one, what do you do with that? Because you really need a VR headset. Well, you could essentially, these VR experiences are delivered via a game engine. So you were right on the money with the game thing. You could look at it through a computer screen, and it would be a little bit like playing a 3D game, like a first-person shooter, as they're called, in terms of exploring through the window of your computer screen. But if you really want to have the immersive experience, the only way to do that is wearing a VR headset. And there are several technologies around now that allow you to do that.
Yeah.
And for me, the most exciting version is that, we can do one-to-one scale tracking. So if we get a large warehouse that has enough floor space to match the original garden one-to-one, you will physically be able to walk around the environment of the garden and go and look and explore. And again, it's not interactive, it's for you to witness. Yeah. But my goodness, what an experience that will be.
You should unveil it at next year's creativity conference in Iceland and have a garden.
Well, I think that, looking at the timescales for pre-production and production, I think it's entirely possible that we could look at doing that for the Creativity Conference 2023. There's a big venue in called the Harp in Reykjavik that they have spaces big enough, I think, that we could potentially do it, because it's like an opera house thing.
Something to look forward to finally.
Yeah.
We're talking about film. I want to go like a different genre, which is near and dear to my heart. You're directing a film called Haunted. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So it's called It's Haunted.
It's Haunted. Okay.
So It's Haunted is a very simple concept for a film. It's a video diary style film. And the concept is that this couple, they get a really cheap holiday rental of a beach house. They don't know why it's so cheap, but it turns out that the reason it's so cheap is that it's haunted by the spirit of a Mexican woman who was murdered there. And the gist of the narrative is that the female lead, this character, Sam, she is California girl, speaks almost no Spanish. There's a whole bit where she's saying, "Donde está biblioteca?" Like she was taught at school. Like she doesn't know Spanish.
Yeah.
But then the spirit that's trapped in this house gradually learns how to take over her body. I'm so looking forward to sharing this with people. So there's a scene where she's standing almost in the dark and she's just almost slumped, standing on her feet, making noises like ba, 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 z, z, coming out of her mouth as the spirit learns to make the correct sounds and control her body. And then soon she's speaking fluent Spanish and it all just kicks off. And we did old school effects with fishing line and it's beautiful.
That's the best stuff. Now, the actors, did you have a tight script or are you just letting them ad lib a little bit on this thing? Just mostly an outline or tight script on this?
Well, it's an interesting question because, I'm a writer-director. So ordinarily I would be preparing the screenplay, breaking it down, going into production and knowing exactly what I'm shooting. For this project, we actually improvised the entire content of the film. So I prepared 77 scenes. I think we hit about 80, 81 scenes in the end.
Oh.
That I would say to the cast, and I play the supporting lead in this.
That's awesome.
So I'm the guy on the camera. So I'm the boyfriend
Right.
who's insisting on shooting the video diary. We have an omniscient eye camera as well that's capturing some of the content. And it was interesting actually because I used a mechanical gimbal and it was too smooth. I had to find ways to make it less smooth.
Oh, really?
So it didn't look like a Steadicam. It was an interesting challenge. So I came up with these 77 scenes. The arc of the narrative I prepared. And each scene I would say, okay, these are the key B notes you've got to hit. These are the key beats you've got to hit. If there's any specific language like, okay, this is the name of that character. This is what's going to happen in this scene. And we would just run the scene. And we shot the film pretty much almost in the order that it occurred in the narrative. So we would lay down the tracks for the tram lines, if you like, for a particular detail in the narrative. And then from then on, we knew, okay, that's the name of the character, or that's the backstory that you mentioned, and so on. And then we would do multiple takes. We do often at least 10 takes, but we'd get several takes, and each time the flow would improve and the nuance of the performance would improve. But the whole thing was improvised. We actually shot the entire feature film, I would say, it was under 13 shooting days. I'd say it was close to 10 shooting days.
That's what I did for my feature. Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah.
And we had one pickup day, I had to do later on.
Yeah, it was really intense. But we got the coverage and, the rough cut's nearly done and I'm very happy with it.
Was the editor on set marking the scenes or did you just go to the end and say, I like these scenes the best, put together something, a rough cut, then I'll sit with you and I'll do a tight cut, or are you with the editor the whole time?
It varies from project to project. And, I'm writing books on editing and post-production, and I am an editor. For this project, I'm cutting it. But I have an editor that I've worked with before, absolutely phenomenal, a gentleman called Kant Pan. He edited The Crying Game. I think he was Oscar nominated for that.
Oh, my God. The Crying Game? That was
just phenomenal editor. I shot a film, actually, that I got Best Director for a few years back, short film. And I just gave him all the stuff, and we talked through the content, and he said, "Just let me do a first cut."
Wow, that's a great editor.
The way I like to work with editors as a director is the way I like to work with actors. When I'm working with an actor, I'll give them my direction, they give me a performance, and I give them notes.
Yeah.
And I have rules about performance. One of my rules is that as an actor, it's not your responsibility to invent a reason to feel anything. It's my responsibility as the director to give you a reason to feel. And it's my job to tell you if you did it right or not. And so I have a promise that I give to actors. I say, I promise I will tell you if it's wrong. And it's my responsibility, not yours, to get it right.
Oh, good.
So you can just see them relax. And I'll say, I'll sit next to the camera. Don't worry about eye lines. You're not performing for the camera or the crew or the audience. I am your audience. Just perform for me. And I promise you, I will tell you if it's right or wrong. And then they just go for it. It's magical. You remove the responsibility that they shouldn't have. Like you see actors doing the Meisner technique.
Yeah.
And I just think, I'm sorry, this is going to be terribly controversial, but when I see actors doing the Meisner technique, I just think they have a director who doesn't know how to direct.
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't need that. You should not need to direct yourself. You shouldn't need to invent feelings or ways of giving a line. That's absolutely the director's responsibility. Your job is to be present and to be truthful and learn your lines. And the rest is the director's job.
I was going to say, an assistant director, that was critical on my film. Do you find that you don't need an AD? Or
Oh, no. I totally need an AD. The ADs, it's like producing and directing. The producer doesn't make the film. The director doesn't do the work of making the film. It's the line producer who produces the film.
Yep.
They're the one writing the checks and dealing with everything, catering and everything. And it's not the director that's really doing the work of making the film. The director gets the joy of making the film.
Yeah.
The assistant director does the work.
Yep.
And I like to be closely involved in the breakdown. So, when we're lining out a script and just breaking down the script, right?
Yeah.
So when you're doing that and you're preparing your shoot, I like to be closely involved. But I think my job as a director is to be an enabler in the best possible way. My job is to enable everyone around me to fulfill the maximum potential, their true potential. But the assistant director is the one that tells me what to do. There's assistant director, an AD I've worked with in the UK is phenomenal, Sarah Mooney. She's just fantastic. She would come over and she would say, I remember this one occasion, she thought I wanted another take. I actually did not, so we were all good. But she came over, instead of saying, we don't have time for another take, or, why are you doing that? She just said, okay, so if you want another take, here's the list of setups for the rest of the day. You'll need to choose one to strike off the list. Which setup do you want to not do so that you can do another take? It was beautiful. Anyway, working with an editor, I like to work with editors the way I work with actors. So I give them my direction. I let them give me a performance, which in this case is to do some editing. And when they're ready to show me what they've done, I'll watch it and I'll give them notes. But what I don't do is sit over their shoulder, asking them to be little more than button pushers.
Yeah.
If you don't trust your editor to have a feel for the nuance and the flow of the content that you've given them, you need to hire a different editor, because the editor's role is incredibly creative, just as an actor's role is. You wouldn't stand behind the actor moving their limbs around while they perform. Why would you do that to your editor?
Yeah, I could talk about this. I know there's so many things we're going to talk to you about, so I'll get off of this.
But I wanted to say before we move on, Kantpan, amazing editor, right? Everyone hire him; he's amazing. And he showed me this edit. It was a 9-minute film, and I had 12 notes in the entire thing.
Wow.
and only 3 of them stuck. 9 of them, he said every single time, he was like, "Yeah, I know, I wanted to do that, but you didn't shoot it." Okay, move on to the next one. Yeah, I wanted to do that, but you didn't shoot it. 3 of them stuck. They were tiny, like 2 frames later on that cut. He's phenomenal. That was his first cut.
Yeah.
I was just absolutely blown away.
Yeah.
And we've got it's coming together beautifully. But it's a very low budget indie film. The next project's much bigger. We're gunning for $8 million for the next one, but that incorporates the true VR version.
Wow, good for you, man. I'm a good creative guy, but I'm a bad businessman, so I get screwed by distributors and all that stuff. I'm sure you're going to be all set, but I just, twice in 2 films I haven't done very well. But but they're not landmark films; they're just kind of things, right? But it would be good to recoup some of the money back. It's just that's a whole nother podcast.
That's a huge thing, isn't it? It's basically, I think the situation for indies is that the studios do have a vertical monopoly now, right? They control everything. And one of the things they do is they cut indie film producers out of getting access to theaters. And interestingly as well, there's all this box office, right? Everyone talks about box office,
Yep.
but up to 60% of film revenues could be from online sales.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you'll notice that the studios, they never give you online revenues. And the reason is that they can, here's my theory, right? My theory is they know that they can lock indies out of the theaters because it's a physical thing, right? There's limited space. There's just back-to-back releases for the physical theaters, but they can't lock anybody out of an online space.
Right.
There's no seating limit, right? So if you have a great indie film, you can put it out there and make fantastic revenues. You can get really good return for your investors. But it's difficult to get the numbers to show investors that can happen. It's really interesting.
Yeah, you really have to be wear many hats and just be good at everything to be successful, which you are.
Well, I don't know about that, but
You're very good at creating your concepts, and you have a great eye, and I know you're a very good storyteller. Which brings me to the next topic. You've written a book, and I don't know you super well. Like it's really weird. I met you we were talking before we got on. I met you like once in person, and we kind of vaguely remember each other. I think I remember you more than you remember me because I think you were presenting. It was at like a Hunt's photo and video thing in like Melrose or something, and you were there.
I remember you pretty well. I remember you pretty well, but carry on.
Okay. But anyways, I took away it's an optimism about you. And I think this shows in your latest project where over the course of your life, you've picked up some, I don't know if it's philosophical or mystical viewpoints, but you want to talk about the book? It's good to have because a lot of people are depressed and not happy and don't have a good outlook right now. So I think what you're writing is a very good thing.
Well, thank you. There's kind of two questions there. So let me answer the first one first, which is, I think you were saying, what is it with this optimistic outlook?
Sure.
I describe myself primarily as a realist. And I think that if you are truly a realist, you naturally become an optimist. But I think where people go wrong with optimism is that, so you get people saying, oh, you're an optimist, you should be more realistic. But people who say that tend to not be very good at appreciation. So you and I live in societies where if you turn the tap on in the kitchen, it's very likely that you can drink that water.
Mm-hmm.
And if you turn the light switch on the wall, it's very likely that a light is going to turn on. And we just take that for granted. But my goodness, there are a lot of people in the world that cannot take things like that for granted. And although, there's issues maybe in the US with the cost of medical care, but if you have a medical condition, chances are that one way or another, you can get treatment for that medical condition. And my goodness, there's a lot of people in the world that don't have that privilege. Mm. And if you have someone in your world that loves you and there's someone that you love and you're not alone, well, that's fantastic. If you have the use of your eyesight, both of your legs, if you can breathe properly, if you can dance, if you should choose to, if you've got the use of your taste buds, if your fingertips work, your hands work, you can pick things up, sculpt, shape, play an instrument. If you have the full use of your body, my goodness, not everyone has that. And I think when you stop and realize how absolutely extraordinary it is to exist, and just take a moment to think about how wild it is that you exist at all. And there's this beautiful idea, you think you're sitting on Earth, but you're not. The Earth is spinning and spiraling around the sun, and they're both moving through space, however many thousands of miles an hour. The chances of intelligent life developing randomly, and here we are, right? But the chances of it happening by any scientific standard, the chance is nil. It's like 0. Loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of zeros, and then a 1% chance that we could be here at all.
Sure.
And years ago, I think it was about 17, I saw a presentation by a lady she developed the concept of gamification. And she was talking about, what if we gamified life? And she was saying that people will play games for hours and hours and hours to get a perfect score. Well, what if we could gamify life's challenges and see if we get a perfect score at being alive? And one of the examples they came up with this was years ago, they were looking at more efficient ways to move oil around. And they made a game out of it. And lo and behold, people playing that game found significantly more efficient ways to transport oil. But it was based on the actual world. So the consequence was that they implemented those changes and oil movement got more efficient in the real world. And it really set me off thinking about it, that you could spend 6 hours playing a computer game where the net is you get older and, you had fun and that's a legitimate way to spend your time. Or you could spend 6 hours doing the basics on Duolingo and learn a second language. You could have a character in a game go to the gym and get stronger and have more physical strength. Or you could go to a gym and get stronger and have more physical strength. It's the same kind of thing. So I just think that I became optimistic through appreciation. and realizing that, yeah, life is hard. But we have this culture that says that pain is unacceptable, that suffering should be avoided. And I think that that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what pain and suffering are, particularly pain. Pain is a messenger. If someone sent you a letter, you wouldn't avoid making eye contact with the postman. You've got to receive that message, and you've got to understand what it's telling you and respond to it. But instead, we live in a culture that's telling you should never feel pain of any kind. You should just ignore it, avoid it. It's worse than ignoring it. Just avoid its existence. I think that's a problem. And when you realize that it's okay if there's some pain in your life, you realize that bad things happen, for sure. Definitely bad things happen. But good things also happen, right? They both happen. And if you're going to be realistic, you really need to honor yourself by focusing, let's say, not even 50-50, right? We're wired to focus on negatives more than positives. But if you just gave yourself about 1/3 of your attention on things that you genuinely appreciate and are happy about, not just 95% the negative, but like 70% the negative, it can be transformational for your quality of life. And it also helps you to see that most people, we're all in it together, right? Everyone's having a human experience, and nobody makes a bad decision on purpose, but they don't always have great information, and they don't always have a great solution.
I think a lot of people, they understand that there's pain, they can deal with that. I think happiness and finding trust in real happiness, that it's not fleeting and it's something you can count on. I think that's what a lot of people have a problem with. I mean, like I work, and a lot of my time is got divorced, big transformational the past couple of years. So I kind of have a hard time taking for granted that happiness is real and it's going to be something that that's credible, And I wonder if people have that problem. They almost embrace pain and disappointment, and they can live with that, but they don't know how to embrace your optimistic outlook and those moments of happiness and how to be in that. I think that's hard for some people today.
It's a huge challenge. But I was not using the word happiness. And I think that happiness is actually quite complex.
Yeah.
Because, we're sold it, aren't we, by the media and marketing people. We should feel happy all the time. But I think that happiness is, it's almost akin to euphoria, and you wouldn't want to be in that state all the time. I think that what's much healthier is to find contentment, fulfillment, pride, which is not the same thing as pridefulness, right? Pridefulness is not a socially popular thing, but to feel proud of what you have achieved, what you have done, the work that you've done, and the change that you've wrought in the world. That's legit. It's like people say anger is always bad, but actually there's a time for righteous anger. And in the same way, there's a time for pride. I think that happiness is momentary. And I think we should take those pleasures when they come and embrace them and accept them. But you're not going to stay in a state of happiness all the time. And maybe I'm just being pedantic about the language, but I think that making peace with your reality is worthwhile, is what I suppose I'm trying to say. But to go back to the optimism thing, it's one of those things. If you believe that life has a purpose and you abide by a paradigm of some kind, whether it's a spiritual or religious thing or a philosophical thing, all the studies show that you will tend to live longer, be happier, have less physical illness and mental illness, and have a better quality of life in general. So if you're going to choose between pessimism and optimism, you might as well choose optimism. It just makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I came to that realization late in life. It was only probably about 5 or 6 years ago where I started beginning every day with gratitude. I just said, I focused on the negative stuff too much, and I had to start with gratitude. So I do that daily.
Amazing.
I ask for stuff too, right? But
yeah,
that does help. It does kind of get me. I'll catch myself. I'll say, I'm in a car. Why am I thinking about stuff that's not happening? And I'll convert it, transform it into a positive thing.
yeah.
I will say, once I started doing that, I had better relationships at work, and my home life, I'm still working on better things with my kids and stuff, but it does have an impact. You do have to level set yourself. So
yeah.
I guess I want to get back to your book. Is that kind of what it does? Does it level set you?
Yeah.
These checkpoints, and you realize and you appreciate things and you return to optimism?
Yeah. I mean, so the book is interesting. So I began a meditation practice when I was 11, and I really got into the whole spiritual thing. The New Age movement hit my hometown like a hammer.
Wow. Yeah.
And so, I was just learning about everything I could possibly find. And I never particularly set out to live a spiritual life, but I'm a fan of the universe. I remember when I was 3 years old, we had this spinning top. I remember, you press the thing at the top and it spins around and makes a woo noise. And I remember the moment of realization where I discovered, that's what this thing does. That's what it's for. You press the top and it spins around and makes a woo noise. I get it. And I tested how fast I could move it. And it turns out that there was a sort of limit to how fast you could make it spin. The thing wouldn't allow you to make it go any faster. And I thought, so it's got these kind of, adult language, but it's got parameters, right?
Yeah.
And obviously at 3, I wasn't using that word, but it's got these things, this way that it works. And then I had this ping moment where I realized the universe is just going to be full of things like this, that you press them and they go woo. There's just everywhere you go, there's going to be new things to learn. And I want to know all of them, right? That was my 3-year-old brain. I want to know how everything works.
Wow.
And so by the time I was 11, I was raised by intellectual hippies, and I've joked many times, it's like being raised by wolves, but with better tea. So we could talk about anything and discuss anything. And I just wanted to know how everything worked. And then that led to me studying a massive amount of stuff. So I studied Tai Chi, I became a Tai Chi master. I studied Reiki, became a Reiki master. I studied the Celtic shamanic tradition and just everything I could find. And I learned a lot of stuff. And most of what I learned, I thought was, it was hokum. It was just people pleasing themselves and trying to be interesting or dramatic. You get these, amongst spiritual, so-called self-named spiritual circles. You'll have conversations with people where they'll say something like, it's the turn of the season, we're coming around to winter now. And then they'll say, like the migration of the soul.
Yeah.
And then the other person says, and then the first person says, And then there's this sort of knowing nods that people do to one another because they have this secret truth. It's a sort of spiritual elitism. It's absolute rubbish. But along the way,
Yeah.
I found that I did find some things that for me, they resonated as truth. Years ago, I studied with, I'm going to use the word mystic. It's a whole other story, but I studied with this guy, and he used to say that if you think about the sitar, the Indian sitar instrument, beautiful instrument, it has 2 sets of strings. There's the strings that you play, but there's a second set of strings called the sympathetic strings. I think that's what they're called. You don't play them. They resonate in harmony with the notes that you play, and that's what provides that beautiful background hum almost that you get, that resonance from a sitar. And this guy used to say that inside everyone there are strings like that, these sympathetic strings. And when you encounter truth, they resonate in harmony with the truth. So that when you encounter truth, you will know it. In all of the studies, all the teachers and the studies and the books and the practices, every now and then there'll be something where you just feel like, I don't need this to be verified. This is truth. Now, I think when it comes to social engagement, we're not very good at telling the difference between something that is true and something that is compelling. And that's something that politicians and pop stars use to their benefit all the time. But when it comes to exploring spiritual matters or the nature of being or the purpose of being alive, I think that when you have that opportunity to reflect, it just doesn't feel right, or it does feel right. So the book that I've written, it's called How to Be, and it's intended to be a practical philosophy book. It's about 124,000 words broken into 5 or 10 minute reads.
Oh, that's great. I was going to say, I'm just interrupting real quickly because you write a lot of books on how to train people. I was going to bet that you applied that.
Oh, yeah.
Because rather than one diatribe, that you would break it down so people can assimilate and take it in and then move on to the next lesson. So
absolutely.
Yeah,
there's different sections. And so the book begins with, how do you know you exist?
That's a great question. Wow.
Well, how do you, it's surprisingly difficult to answer that question. So let me put that question to you. I mean, so that, the sections of the book, if I may, I'll read you they're very brief titles. The sections of the book are being, subjectivity, identity, connection, society, truth, fear, love, change, why, purpose, and creativity. So if you start with that initial question, how do you know that you exist? So Bob, how do you know that you exist?
Yeah, that's hard, man. I'm thinking, I'm looking up right now the word solipsism or psism. You've heard of that?
Yeah, solipsism. Well, solipsism is not the question of whether you exist. Solipsism is the belief that the current moment is the only moment that actually exists, and it only exists for you.
Okay.
So solipsistic beliefs are that it's hilarious. I love it. So the idea is if you had one foot in one room and another foot in another room in a doorway, and you turn your head and look at one, that room exists, the other one disappears. Turn your head and look at the other, right? So it's whatever you're perceiving right now, literally is the only thing that exists. The uncertainty principle is fascinating. Yeah, so solipsism is your external reality, but how do you know that you exist?
That's the whole consciousness question. Most people worry about not existing. They don't ask the question, do they exist? They take it for granted. They worry their whole lives about losing consciousness and not existence, being nothing, right? So,
Right, yeah.
yeah, for me, it's rough. I got to tell you, because if I'm totally honest, even at a young age, the body to me, I felt like a robot or like a little thing looking out the eyes of a robot. Just felt like I was like observing something from a vehicle,
Yeah,
and it kind of took a while to me to get familiar with myself.
yeah.
The last two episodes, one was an actor, and the last part of talking to him was he went through this whole mysticism and spiritual journey. We talked about that. There was another guy that we just talked to. He was an autism whisperer and a visionary. He's like a very famous psychic, and he went from being totally on the dark side to like
Wow.
having some transformation.
Wow.
And he, as part of that conversation, said that I was, which something I wondered, that I had autistic traits because I have an autistic daughter. And he was like, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And the reason you feel like this is you're probably very high functioning, but 80% it comes from the father. And so it was kind of like,
How did that feel?
well, it's funny. I turned and asked him how it felt for him, because it was like, I said, how did it feel to you when you were diagnosed in midlife with Asperger's, and explained maybe you not picking up on social cues or not getting stuff. And he was like, at that point in life, I was kind of past that, and I made things work for me that worked. And if it didn't work, it didn't define me, a condition or something. At this point, I love a lot of things about my autistic daughter. She totally loves herself, and she gets over things quickly. She's very happy. She vibrates on a very higher level, spiritual talk. So there's many things that I really admire about her. She may have a little bit difficulty functioning in this world and socializing with, the masses, but she has a very good comfort level with who she is and where she's going in life and what she's doing.
Fantastic.
And I would think she kind of is someone who read your book about optimism and followed the rules. That would be her. It's almost like she would be an optimistic person, but she has autism. So it's kind of weird.
Do you know, I think it's fascinating. I mean, some people say that autism might be the human brain 2.0.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge for people, it's I can't remember, was it Einstein? It was something like, if you measure a fish on the basis of how well it climbs a tree, it's going to fail every time.
Right.
But you put it in the ocean, and now, try and get a monkey to do what a fish could do. Forget it. So I think part of the challenge for people with autism, and it's a spectrum, obviously, right? So they call it ASD now, autistic spectrum disorder.
Yep.
But that we live in a society that is primarily designed by non-autistic people for non-autistic people. And so who knows how great life could be for someone who has Asperger's.
Well, we all start as fish because we're in our birth canal. When we're breathing water and stuff. It's only when we come out and get smacked by life that we breathe air and kind of adjust very quickly, right? So it's kind of like humans are very adaptive from the whole birth process to the end. We just don't give ourselves credit, I don't think.
Right.
We did an email and I said, oh, by the way, Maxim, this is kind of a paranormal podcast. So can we touch on a couple things, which we did about haunted, but there was a story you had in the spiritual side.
Yeah.
There's a story you had where you witnessed your own birth, right? And then you told your mother about it and the room where it happened, right? And that's
right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Tell us about it.
Yeah. Well, before we breach to that, because I really want to tell you about that. It's interesting. I'm just laughing because I remember being smacked when and I was so angry. But before we get to that, just to wind up the book, to finish off that, the idea, if I may, the idea with the book is it's a very conversational style. It's written to be accessible. So I've minimized the complex language. Philosophy is often, like, if you've ever read any Heidegger, it's just like you lose track of the beginning of the sentence halfway down the page. But it's tough sometimes, right? And it's good stuff, but it's hard to track. So it's written to be accessible. And each section of the book, 5 or 10 minute read, deals with a particular aspect of something, and it's quite conversational, and it's intended to inspire, but in particular, it's intended to be helpful. So I'll give you, and inevitably there's a lot of psychoanalysis in it, but I'll give you one simple example I've given quite a few people. If you have a boundary with somebody, a social boundary, and they transgress that boundary and you do not redress the boundary, you have just agreed to a new boundary.
Mm.
Now, you might regret it, you might resent it, you might be annoyed about it, you might be in denial about it, but you have agreed to the new boundary because you let them do it.
Yep.
The human brain takes about 15 days to go through a transformation. So if you're trying to change a behavior in yourself or in someone else, just keep it up for 15 days. But and your brain starts to remodel. This 2-week thing is quite important for us for some reason. They've done all sorts of studies with brains adjusting to, artificial limbs and all sorts. And it takes about a couple of weeks and the brain starts to rewire itself really nicely. It's amazing.
Wow.
So if you want to redress the boundary, you just need to do so for 15 days and you will probably succeed in pushing the boundary back to where it was. But this is what I mean about realism, is that if the Buddha had this whole thing about attachments, and if you have attachments, it will lead to suffering. The Buddha didn't have an attachment to you having attachments. And the Buddha never said, don't have attachments. The Buddha just said, if you have them, this is how they will work. There is a theory that maybe the attachments that we have, the illusions that we identify with, the suffering that we experience could be the reason we're here. So is it necessarily to be avoided? Not necessarily. Getting het up about things and engaging. It's a great example, as I just found out. I moved into a new flat in London a couple of weeks ago. And 2 weeks in, the landlords told me, by the way, sorry, but we've sold the flat and you're going to have to move out.
Oh, God.
And
2 weeks, there's your 2-week window again.
Yeah, right?
You get to learn something
new.
Strange,
isn't it, how that turns up? 14 days, 15 days. And of course, my initial reaction, I haven't even finished unpacking and I'm so busy. But what I wasn't was upset because I figured, well, you never know. I might end up with an even nicer flat. I might get an even nicer place. It could be just a little universe adjustment thing. Having attachments isn't necessarily bad. And so anyway, the whole, the book is intended to give a kind of guide. It's not based on a particular religion. It's not based on a particular spiritual paradigm. It's intended to be an accessible version of rational philosophy. Here's another way that you can approach this. Actually, the beginning, early chapter talks about how does learning work? Human learning is relative and associative. But what do you do when you're a baby? You've got nothing to associate with. And so here's how learning probably happens. And here's how you come to know who you are and what you are. And who is the real self? Is it the thinker or is it the self thinking, this is me thinking? It's the Zen philosophy. I'm inclined to agree or believe that the observer is the true self. And interestingly, the observer doesn't really want anything. And it just loves witnessing things and understanding them. To go back to the memory.
Well, before you go there, I want to wrap one thing on the book, if you don't mind. So I know you have many kind of, fishing poles in the lake and you got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
How far are you in the book? When do you think it will be available? And would it be available on your website?
Well, thank you for asking. So it has to be finished in 2 weeks.
2 weeks? Wow.
Here we go again, right? It has to be finished in 2 weeks. I'm in talks with Yellow Kite Books to publish it, which I'm absolutely thrilled about. They're an amazing publisher. And they actually publish a lot of stuff by Eckhart Tolle and the Dalai Lama. So I'm flattered and honored that they're even speaking with me about publishing. A big part of it is I need to build up my public image. So I'm about to start a series of podcasts, one for each of the sections of the book.
Well, we'll have you back. Okay, cool. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm also about to shoot a pilot for my own TV show, which is the Hot Tub Philosophy Show, where I'm going to sit in a hot tub with famous people, ask them about their attitude and their outlook, and it's just going to be awesome. And that came from, I was mentoring some film students at the Sundance Film Festival, which, by the way, I expect to be at, and my friends and I will be hosting a pajama party there. That's the plan.
Oh.
But there were all these film students, and I was mentoring them, and there was a hot tub. So a bunch of us sat in the hot tub talking about what the word why means. And then the next night, there was this big competition to see who could be in the hot tub to talk about what volition is.
Yeah.
And so my friend and I, he's a producer, he's a showrunner. We were just like, hey, this would make a great TV show. So now we've got a couple of people interested in financing it. And that will build up the awareness.
You need to add that to the creativity conference too, by the way, probably a garden and a hot tub. You might want to throw that in there.
Well, do you know what? We're looking at doing a trip to the Blue Lagoon, which is a geothermic
Wow.
pool. So we could easily end up having a big creative discussion in geothermic.
It all comes together, Maxim.
Do you know, ultimately for me, it usually comes together in a cafe with coffee and cake. But so the short answer is hopefully Yellow Kite Books will publish. But for me to get to that point, I'm working with a PR guy. So here's the memory. Now, I don't talk about this very often, but I'm just going to share with you. I appear to have a lot of what people usually call past life memories. And some of these have been verified by other people. A lot of memories of, in one form or another, being in a military roles or practicing martial arts. And when I began studying martial arts, I advanced very much faster than is ordinary for the art that I was studying. And I just have an affinity for it that it's more like remembering than learning. And I love this idea, by the way, of when you meet somebody, if you entertain the paradigm that we are all one, not just you and I, but the chair I'm sitting on, the air that we're breathing.
Yeah.
Then when you meet somebody, you're not really meeting them, you're remembering them. And so, it's like one hand meeting the other. There's nothing to fear. There's nothing to worry about because you're reconnecting. And a beautiful concept I heard a little while ago is when you exhale, the breath that you exhale takes about 2 weeks to reach every continent on Earth. And in fact, when you inhale, probably every time you inhale, you're inhaling at least a small amount of particles of air that a dinosaur exhaled.
You always think of like rocks and plants as kind of like, not conscious. But people take like ayahuasca and whatever, and their mind is totally open to this like newer oneness and this whole type of different world that's way beyond our normal senses it can take. Yeah. And I always wonder, wouldn't it be kind of interesting if like plants and rocks, even though they're just so stoic and they're there, what if their senses were just totally crazy and they're living a great life and we had no idea and we were the ones that were totally contained?
Well, there is a theory that consciousness is an emergent property of matter. And just as magnets, the atoms in magnets are aligned in such a way that magnetism flows through them and we get a detectable magnetic effect. Well, what if the structure of our brains is such that consciousness flows? Tesla said that consciousness is not in the brain is an antenna. It picks up consciousness from some other place. It's fascinating. Yep. And there's this idea of animism, which is at the root of all the global religions, that spirit dwells in matter and can somehow cause matter to move, to take action. It has an influence. And there's been some really interesting studies in the relationship between consciousness and matter. In fact, there's an amazing, we don't have time for it now, but there's an amazing explanation you might have heard of the double slit experiment.
Oh, yeah. It was I did a documentary. It was in a documentary I did. Yeah, Afraid of Nothing. Yep.
Oh, great. There's a new theory that's come around that what's really happening is that the light particles are not behaving like waves. It's a probability distribution pattern. And it's only when consciousness is involved that the probability collapses into a finite location.
Yes.
So basically, the memory is that I'm floating over the hospital thinking, what a nice evening it is to be born. Huh. And it's interesting because my memory of it is that it was about 8:30 in the evening. But my mother thinks I was born around 8:30, something like that. She says it was more like 6. But I can hear through the window that's open at the top, I can hear my mother as I'm being born. And I'm thinking, yes, and I can hear the city around me floating in the air. And I think, oh, wait, I'm going to be late. I'm going to miss my birth. And I fly in through the open window at the top. And there's my mother, and I can see the top of my head coming out. And I think, thank goodness, I've missed the head crush. It's just the shoulder crush that's a lot easier. So I jump into my body, and I'm kind of popping in and out of my body in this memory. And then I very quickly, it feels like quite quickly, I'm out. And I am so cold that the primary sensation that I'm feeling is all over my body. I'm really cold. And I'm sort of wafted around the room a bit. I feel like I'm being moved. I can't see. It's just incredibly bright, much, much too bright and really cold. And then I feel like disorientated, which I realized later was because I was upside down and someone smacked me. And I felt that pain like a shock through my body. And of course, scream. Of course, they did that. They don't do it now so much these days, but they do it to clear the lungs if the baby's not crying. And I just remember thinking, what the hell are you doing? That really, 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 really hurt. And I was really upset. And so the cry was half shock, half anger.
Yeah.
And then I think it was confusing because I couldn't see, but I could feel I was moved around. But some business happened, and then I was swaddled and put next to my mother and very quickly fell asleep. That was the memory. Now, fast forward many years, I described the memory to my mother, and she confirmed that's exactly what was there. And there's a couple of interesting details, because one was the type of windows, the building that we were in. I've since visited that building and recognized the look of the window. It was exactly as I remembered it. And it was a male midwife assisted by a female nurse. The layout of the room, where things were, was as I described it. And so, there's obviously no way that a baby could see, let alone take on board what was going on. So there's something very interesting there. Something very interesting about that. There's another story I don't know if I mentioned to you, that when I was about 6 years old, I nearly drowned. I fell into the sluice of a canal. The water was pouring onto the top of me, and I whacked my head on the concrete as I fell in. And as I was upside down, I realized I wasn't able to turn myself the right way up. The water was pouring onto me and pushing me down under the surface. And just for a moment, I thought, the first thing I thought was, how am I going to explain to my mum that I'm soaking wet? Because I definitely shouldn't be on the canal. So that was my first thought, because I'm going to get into trouble. But then I thought, I might die. And then I thought, the curious thought that I had at 6 years old was, wow, I really thought that this was going to be a longer life, and now I'm going to have to go through teething again. And you would call it diapers, we call them nappies. I'm going to have to go through nappies and teething again. It's so annoying. And then my brother jumped in and pulled me out and saved my life. But what a curious thing to think, So I think the mystic I was telling you about, he had this thing where he would say, if you're looking at a spiritual practice or a belief or an idea, number one, if your beliefs don't match your reality, it is usually your belief that needs to change. And I think that's something that a lot of people would benefit from thinking about.
Wow. Yeah.
But the second thing he used to say is, if is it helpful? If you're looking at some spiritual practice or some experience that you've had, or it seems like a spirit has communicated with you and they've said something to you, is it helpful? He used to say that the spirit world is perfectly capable of materializing in front of you and slapping you in the face. So if it's subtler than that, and it's like, the candle wafted slightly to one side, therefore I think I should change career, Just ask yourself, is this thing that you're doing helpful? I was talking to somebody recently about, how do you know you're good? It's easier to know if you're bad.
Sure, yeah.
So, I think you can know that you intend to be good, and that's probably all you can be sure of, really, your intentions. But you can't know if your outcomes or your actions are good. It's too much information. There's no way you could analyze that. But if you want to know if you're a baddie, it's really straightforward. Are you killing people? And if the answer is yes, there's a very good chance you're a baddie. Are you harming people? Are you coercing people? Are you forcing people? But in particular, are you harming people? And whatever your motivation, whatever your justification, whatever your paradigm, whatever your argument, whatever your spiritual or socio-political position, if you find that your beliefs lead you to a place in your life where you are potentially killing people or harming people, just so we're clear, you're probably a baddie. Just think a little bit about what you're doing. There's a beautiful a couple of comedians, I can never remember their names, in the UK. They do these sketches. And there's one sketch where there's these two SS soldiers in the Second World War. And they're saying, right, we're going to get those allies tomorrow. It's going to be really good. We're going to go to war and we're going to fight, and it's going to be brilliant. We're going to win. And the other guy says, yeah, it's going to be really good. I've just got one question. He says, yeah. He says, what's the question? He says, have you noticed that we've got a skull and crossbones on our hats? He says, yeah. And he says, and the flag, the banners that we've got, skull and crossbones on there, on that tank, skull and crossbones on there. He said, I know this is probably a stupid question, but do you think maybe we might be the baddies?
And then they shot him.
And the
His
other guy
friend shot
says,
him, probably, right? Yeah.
well, they're just like, oh no. And then they take off their hats and they run away. So I love it because they're nice guys. They're like, oh, wait a minute, we're the baddies. No.
Yeah.
I think it's important when we're choosing a life path, it's important to know that you could be wrong. It's not to say that you are wrong, right? It's not beat yourself up about it, but whatever it is that you're doing, we all want to be helpful. We all want we hope the world will be a better place for us having been here. When you reach the end of your days, you hope that you'll be able to look back and believe that you will be missed and that the impact that you've had has been a positive one, that it was worth you being here, not just for you, but for the world. But as you go about your life and you're trying to do that thing, you're trying to be impactful and cause change and make things happen and be happy and whatever, dance under the moonlight and drink blue cocktails or whatever it is that you're doing, it's really helpful. I recommend blue cocktails, by the way, they're awesome. It's helpful if you just are aware that it is always possible that you may be mistaken about anything. But the beauty of time is that in the very next moment, when your understanding deepens and your perspective widens and you get new information, and that new information and that new understanding allows you to have a different point of view and therefore to make a different decision, there's no need for you to defend the point of view you had 5 seconds ago, never mind 5 years ago. You're not that person anymore. It's okay for you to have a new point of view. You can just be a different person and think, well, I did think that then, but I'm not going to defend it. That's no longer my point of view.
I started doing the podcast after I made a documentary, which had the double slit experiment. It's called Afraid of Nothing. It's a whole paranormal consciousness type thing, tome.
Oh, yeah.
I did it when my mom passed. It really left me kind of shaken.
Yeah.
So anyway, I did that movie. But I mean, I started with the podcast once COVID hit. I was like, I'm gonna be alone for a while, so I might as well have interesting conversations. So what doing a podcast does, especially if you interview guests rather than just talk yourself, you hear viewpoints and become more self-aware. You become aware of things you didn't consider before. Right. So that's what's been very good for me the past year and a half, 2 years. Like tonight.
That's fantastic. I love it.
So Maxim, we've covered a lot of ground tonight, but where we came the past year, 2 years, kind of a dark place some people emerged and did quite well, but dark for others. What did you find? Because you're usually a roundabout. You're usually traveling all over the world. You were probably grounded somewhat during COVID. What, is a couple quick takeaways that you had based on the past couple years? And then looking ahead, a lot of people are pessimistic, but as a futurist, we've already said you're an optimist. What do you see looking ahead that gives you hope?
Oh my goodness. Great. Okay. So let's start with the lessons learned. I think that one of the important things that I thought really came to light in the course of the lockdowns and the pandemic is that, human nature is human nature. It's universal. And it hasn't changed very much for probably 150, 200,000 years. And your needs are honest. I don't know another way of putting that. Your needs are honest. So we need social contact. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You need air, water, food, shelter. There's a kind of order of priority or urgency is another way of putting it. But we need to be causal agents. We need to cause change. We need to create. We need to grow. We need to change ourselves. And so I think that one of the things that became clear during all the lockdowns is this realization that it was harder to meet our basic needs, but not impossible. And I think one of the takeaways for me is that, you really need to honor those basic needs. Don't just keep plowing ahead and working or if you're lonely, and so many people are lonely. It's so painful. It's so painful. And there's a very big difference between being lonely and being alone, right? But there are ways that you can find, that anyone can find, to get company. Meetup.com, there's the organization Internations. There's groups that you can join where nobody knows anybody, and you just walk in the room and you can make human connections, and it's ever so important to us. The other lesson learned, I think, is to be realistic. I took the opportunity to finish my book while I was on lockdown. And I actually got busier and busier because a lot of my work is remote anyway. And so I had a very busy time. But when you look at your available resources of time, energy, mental focus, cash, skills, just be realistic. There's that old line about if you've only got lemons, make lemonade. Well, there's some truth in that. If you're not in a position to do something that you want to do, I'm a big believer in roadmaps. And I think the best way that roadmaps work is that, first of all, you have to know where you are now. And to do that, you've got to recognize yourself without judgment, which is very challenging to do. But if you judge yourself, you're seeing the judgment, you're not seeing yourself.
Yeah.
So to know where you are on the map, you need to know yourself. But then you've got where you want to be. And then you look at those two places on the map of your life. And this is kind of something I talk about in the book as well. If you know what those two things are, you can then begin to plan a route. But very often, it helps if you plan the route backwards. So start with the step before the destination, and the step before that, and the step before that, until you arrive at where you are, and then just reverse it and start moving forwards. Because now you've got a roadmap. The most important step in our lives, always, the most important step is the next one. And so as long as you keep moving forward towards those outcomes that you have elected, that you've chosen, great, you're alive, keep going. Just keep going. I think that was the key lesson, a key lesson that I took away from the lockdowns. Just keep going.
Oh, that's great. It's excellent.
But also, talking about human nature, goodness me, right? Forgive yourself for your humanity. Come on.
Yeah.
And one of those, there's a really lovely thing that therapists say this sometimes, is that the way that people sometimes speak to themselves, they would never dream of speaking to anybody else. And if you can catch yourself doing it and instead be kind, especially to yourself, it's transformative. I think kindness, moving on to the future, I think kindness is the key to the next golden age for us as a species.
Boy.
I really do. And I'm choosing those words carefully. Kindness is not the same thing as compassion or love. You don't have to like someone to be kind. You just have to choose to do what's right for the other person, whether or not it's right for you. Because you're looking holistically, you're looking at the world around you, you're looking at everybody's needs, not just yours. But you're included, right? You're on that list. It's not about being used by people. Being in the service of others is not the same as being used by them. Choosing to be in the service of others is powerful. You're in control, you're in command. And my goodness, what you can do when you set yourself to be in a life of service. But you need to know how you can be useful, right? Beforehand.
I think autistic, the higher degree of autism, which seems like a black mark to a lot of people, really is a key to that kindness, because there really is they're very sentient, loving beings for the most part. So I think that could be a good key if that is indeed the case.
100%. And, that may yet come to light. It may yet come to light that we discover, wow, what do you know?
Yep.
Autistic people just love so intensely, so powerfully, so deeply. That's why they shut down.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the sensory overload thing, right? That it's too much, and therefore the brain, in a way, the brain, if you own a dog, your house smells of dog and you don't know it because your brain filters it out precognitively.
Yep.
And maybe there's a similar process going on for people with autism. It's very, very interesting, the potential they represent. I agree. But I think that if you choose kindness, it's extremely powerful. And the ripple effect it has is amazing. It really expands across the universe. It's just the way to go, in my view. But I think in terms of what I'm expecting in the future, I said at the beginning of the pandemic that I felt that when we got back from the lockdowns, life would return to normal approximately 90%. And about 8% of the remaining 10% would be people who are now working from home, just much more people than were before. So we'll have more home workers. And we're not yet fully out of the woods, right? But I think that's where it'll be. And then 2% will be life just being different because of the pandemic, because we've changed. One of the differences that I'm seeing is that people are more compassionate. I've noticed, I don't know if you notice this, if you call a call center, and for whatever reason, like customer service, some company, whatever, it's so common now. Now, it's common for people to finish the call by saying, take care. I love that. I just love it. I called an internet company the other day, and they're like, yeah, this is the technology. This is what we do. Thanks for calling. Take care. Love it. So I think that what's coming, the future is so unbelievably, amazingly fantastic. And the problem that we have is that the media discovered, the news agencies discovered during the Second World War, actually, it was the UK media, the papers. They discovered that if they printed panic-inducing headlines, more people bought the papers. And they've been doing it ever since. It's not in the interests of our media for us to feel calm. It's in their interest for us to be nervous and panicked and anxious, because we're much more likely to spend money on media. And one of the ways we spend that money is by giving attention these days.
Make sure you put that in your book, by the way, because that's a good point. That's one of the things I was thinking about. I think it's important to state.
Yeah. And it's, so they're not going to announce the amazing things that are happening. But let me list a few that are just around the corner. And by around the corner, I mean they're in late stages of testing, right? This isn't just something we think could happen in the future. So first of all, you've got CRISPR, rewriting DNA. So we're now developing technologies that allow you to rewrite your DNA to cure hereditary diseases. That's their primary activity right now. But then you'll be able to choose pieces of DNA and just change your anatomy in helpful ways. That's like, it works. They're just testing it. Fusion energy generation. We've now got working schemas for fusion nuclear reactors, and they're building several, right? Now, a fusion reactor, so currently we use fission, which explodes atoms, and it's dangerous. You can weaponize the waste. You have to store the waste. It's got thousands of years of half-life for radioactivity, and it can melt down. Look at Fukushima, look at Chernobyl. Fusion pushes atoms together. It's the way the sun burns, and it produces heat and water, and that's it. You can't weaponize the waste, at least not yet, and it doesn't require any safe storage, and it can't melt down. Energy parity is really important for socioeconomic parity in the world. We're going to be in a position to gift the technology of fusion energy generation to developing nations so that they can have a lot of very cheap energy, and there's no danger, there's no risk, it's no problem. So that's wonderful. Then we've got autonomous vehicles just around the corner. They're forecasting they'll be 10,000 times safer than a human driver. The car ownership will probably drop to about 30% of its current level, because why would you own a car when you can have a self-driving car pick you up for about a third of the cost of an Uber ride these days? So all of that's coming. Something like 60% of ER visits, emergency room visits, are automobile related. That's going out the window. Insurance cost goes through the floor. Mobility for people who are infirm. Older people who are lonely and alone can now connect, and they don't need to be able to drive. It's completely safe. It's amazing. What did I miss? Oh, cleaning up the environment. We now have the technology to capture all of our output of carbon every year. We've got the technology to withdraw from the air all of the carbon that we release in a given year. And it's just a question of choosing the technology that we implement and scaling it up. A large percentage of our energy is already coming from renewables, and that's growing more and more and more. The list goes on and on. It's wonderful.
Cryptocurrency and AI. What about those two things real quickly? What do you see for that?
Well, I used to say that cryptocurrencies were the future of money. Now I'm saying they are money. 2 or 3 countries have adopted Bitcoin as their currency, and we're absolutely transitioning to cryptocurrencies. You know, there's this magic combination of cryptocurrencies, which are basically certified files in a sense. You know, it's like the serial number on a banknote, except that it's just the serial number.
Huh.
Then you've got NFTs, which are certified digital files, kind of similar to a cryptocurrency, really. But an NFT could be any file. It could be a graphic, a video, an audio file, whatever you want. And the mechanisms for NFTs are brilliant. NFTs are actually smart contracts, and smart contracts are allowing us to operate and function organizationally without a middleman.
What does NFT stand for?
Non-fungible token. The idea of an NFT is if you bought a painting at a gallery, it might well come with a certificate of authenticity for that particular painting. NFTs also have a singular certificate of authenticity. And like I said, you know, you can produce 100 of a thing. It's like a limited edition signed print of a photo, right? But there's just 100 of them. Or you can have anchored sovereign identity projects. Yeah. So I can sell you an NFT. You can sell that to anyone you want, but every time anybody sells it for any value, I automatically get 10% of the sale price. It's anchored to me. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's built into the architecture of the NFT. Absolutely fantastic. So we've got blockchain. That means you can't change it as a ledger. It means you can store data in ways that can't be cheated. Turns out it's very hard to do, and blockchain fixes that. You've got NFTs, smart contracts, cryptocurrencies. This is allowing for completely new paradigms in the way, and by the way, I'm using the present tense, right? Allowing now for completely new paradigms in organizational structure.
Yeah.
And a big thing that's come out recently is the DAO. What's it called? Decentralized autonomous organization. So a DAO is a kind of structured entity in a way that transacts and does things, but it does it fully automatically, usually under the supervision of a group of humans who make decisions about how it will function. But they don't make day-to-day decisions. It does everything. And it uses cryptocurrencies, a whole new paradigm in the way that we function as a society. And it's absolutely brilliant. So yes, cryptocurrencies are here to stay, and they're legit. What was the other one? Cryptocurrencies and AI. Yeah.
Quick question, though. Do you think AI is going to control the currency going forward? Because that would get rid of a lot of the corruption, a lot of the stuff. It would just be programmed, and it would find the best outcome? Or do you think AI is going to have a part in cryptocurrency going forward? Or
they're just different kinds of technology. I don't know that they connect in that way. AI, right now we have what I think we would broadly call algorithmic AI. So it's not really self-aware. It's not really a thinker. It doesn't think. It processes, and it processes in ways that parallel thinking. So it can seem like it's thinking. A good example is if you put something in your calendar with an address and a time, it can pop up telling you, hey, I checked the weather and the traffic, and you're going to need to leave in 15 minutes to make that meeting. That's algorithmic AI. It's super impressive, but it's not, apparently, as far as we know, it's not thinking. We're a little ways off. I imagine in the world today, there's maybe 3 projects that you would say is true AI. AI is here to stay. The next phase of AI is probably in supporting humans. So, for example, I've been forecasting for a while that we're going to have private personal assistants. These will be natural language interaction virtual assistants that will do things like book appointments for you and plan things and arrange things and order food. And you'll just speak to it like a normal person, and it will speak to you like a normal person. It can pay for things and bank cards and that sort of stuff. It will streamline a lot of your life and make things a lot easier. The example I've given many times is you could be on your way home from work and you say to your AI, I'm kind of hungry. And your AI says, well, I've been tracking your food. You haven't had pizza for a while. Do you want me to have your favorite pizza arrive from your favorite pizza place 5 minutes after you get home? And you say, great. And then that's it. It's ordered, done, turns up at your house. And, it's like having a butler, but benign. It's a great setup. Ultimately, though, the thing about AI that's scary for people is that we don't yet know what the mind is, right? We don't really know what consciousness is. I suspect that I don't believe that we have individual consciousnesses. I believe that we are individuated consciousness. And we don't really understand the connections. Quantum entanglement seems to suggest that we're connected in dimensions that we can't yet measure with modern science. Or if we do, no one's talking about it publicly. So we're not really sure what's going on with that. And so it's difficult for us to model it in AI. But ultimately, in terms of processing and thinking, AIs will be superior, far, far superior to humans. And so it'll make a lot of sense for them to run a lot of the world. The danger with AI is not that they feel threatened by humans and want to go to war. The danger is the bias intrinsic to the development of the AIs that comes from us and from subjectivity itself, limited data sets. And then one day, if an AI decides, the world would be better off without humans, because, the way they describe it is that you put an AI in charge of the stationery cupboard at work. And one of the things it must do is never run out of staples. And then it realizes, or paper clips, well, hang on, if there were no people, I would never run out of paper clips. And nobody told it to not kill everyone. So it goes into a deep learning process and develops a neural network, finds a way to kill everyone. And by the time we notice, it's already set it in motion. And it wasn't because it was against humanity. It's because it had been told, never run out of paper clips.
Made the most sense.
Right. And so the challenge is, giving AI enough awareness and understanding, the whole ecosystem, the holistic system of life on Earth, before we give it the nuclear codes.
Interesting. I've totally worn you out where I said it was 45 minutes. We're at an hour 30. Now, we'll have you back when your book is ready and
Great.
Be awesome if you'd like to.
Thank you.
Yeah. But where can people follow you? The Creativity Conference, when's that happening? I'm going to throw a couple questions at you. The Creativity Conference, when is that happening? And your website, how can people follow you? And where can they get inside your head more than they got tonight?
Well, thank you for asking. So the Creativity Conference is really easy to find. The website is just creativityconference.is. IS is the Icelandic domain extension. If you Google the Creativity Conference, you'll see us there as well. We're on all the social media. I'm really easy to find as well. I'm a Google whack. There's just one of me in the known universe. So if you search for Maxim Jago, my website's maximjago.com, Instagram is Maxim Jago, Twitter's Maxim Jago. Everything's Maxim Jago, all one word. Very easy to find.
So that is MAXIMJAGO.
Perfect. That's it.
What about your books? Do you have any books that are already, where can they buy some of your books if they want to learn how to do Adobe Premiere or whatever? Do they get that on Audible? Do they get it on Amazon? Where would they get your books?
Oh, yeah. So, Pearson published the book. They're huge. And so the Premiere Pro Classroom in a Book is just available everywhere. Like all the main bookshops will sell it. That's probably the one that most people would go to. The How to Be book, we're still in talks, so we'll see.
Well, to be continued then. So,
Yeah.
Maxim, thank you so much for your time. It's always, it's been a while since I've talked to you.
Yeah.
I followed you, on LinkedIn and stuff, and I always see and I remember him. So I'm so thankful that you took time tonight to be with me. So thank you so much.
Well, I very much appreciate you inviting me. It's been a real pleasure.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.